Have you ever felt like someone in your own family was hiding something from you? That gut feeling that something just doesn't add up, and no one will tell you the truth? That's exactly what happened to me on my mother-in-law's birthday. While setting up the decorations, I stumbled upon a photo album that changed everything. The moment I opened it, she screamed, "Put that down right now!" But it was already too late, because in that instant, I discovered a secret that had been buried for decades, and the truth about who my real father might be. What I did next exposed her in front of everyone and finally set me free. I still remember the smell of roses and rain that morning, the day I officially became part of Daniel's family. It was our wedding day, the one I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, the kind where everything seems perfect, but you can't quite shake the feeling that something invisible is watching you. The church bells echoed across the small town, and the white petals on the floor stuck to my shoes as I walked toward the altar. Daniel smiled at me, that smile that once made me believe love could fix anything. But behind him, sitting in the front row, was his mother, my future mother-in-law. Her name was Margaret. Everyone in the family spoke about her with admiration and fear at the same time. She's strict, but she means well, Daniel had told me many times before. But the way she looked at me that day, calm, cold, calculating, felt like a silent warning. As if she was saying, "You may have married my son, but you'll never truly belong here." When the ceremony ended, everyone rushed to congratulate us. Margaret hugged Daniel first, kissed his cheek, and whispered something in his ear. He laughed nervously. When it was my turn, she smiled politely, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Her perfume was strong, too strong, and her fingers pressed into my shoulders a little harder than they should have. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said. But her tone didn't sound welcoming. It sounded like a challenge. At the reception, I tried to make a good impression. I talked to her friends, helped serve the cake, and even thanked her for raising such a wonderful son. She nodded, barely looking at me. "Daniel's always been special," she said. "He's my only son. I protected him from everything." She paused, then added softly, "And I plan to keep it that way." I laughed awkwardly, pretending not to understand what she meant. But inside, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. When the guests started dancing, I watched her from across the room. She didn't dance, didn't laugh, she just observed. Her eyes followed every move Daniel made, every word he said to me. It was like she was measuring how much space I was taking in his life. Later that night, after the guests had gone home, I walked into the kitchen to find her alone, cleaning the wine glasses. She didn't turn around when she spoke. "You're young," she said calmly. "You'll learn that marriage isn't just about love. It's about loyalty. And loyalty," she turned to look at me, "should always come to family first." I tried to smile. Of course. Family means everything to me. Her lips curved slightly, but her eyes stayed cold. "Good. Let's hope we mean the same thing." From that night on, I started noticing the little things. Whenever Daniel and I made plans to go somewhere, she would suddenly call, saying she needed help with something urgent. Fixing the fence, changing a light bulb, anything. If I cooked dinner, she'd drop by unannounced and bring her own food. "I thought you might like something real," she'd say, smiling sweetly while replacing my dish with hers. It was subtle, clever. She never looked openly cruel. To everyone else, she was the perfect mother-in-law. Elegant, generous, the kind of woman who hosted charity lunches and volunteered at the church. But behind closed doors, she had a way of making me feel small, like a stranger who had wandered into a place I didn't belong. One Sunday morning, about a month after the wedding, Daniel and I were having breakfast. He reached for his phone, frowned, and said, "Mom's calling again. She says she's not feeling well." I sighed softly. "Daniel, we just visited her yesterday." "I know," he said, hesitating. But she sounded upset, so we went. When we arrived, she was sitting comfortably on the couch, sipping tea and watching her favorite talk show. "Oh, you're here," she said with surprise, as if she hadn't called at all. "How nice of you to visit." Daniel rushed to her side, worried. "Mom, are you okay?" She smiled faintly. "I'm fine, darling. I just missed you." Then she turned to me and added, "And you too, of course, dear." I could feel the sarcasm in her voice, like a knife wrapped in silk. Weeks turned into months, and the tension kept growing. Every time I tried to talk to Daniel about it, he defended her. "She's just lonely," he'd say. "She means no harm." But he didn't see the way she looked at me when he wasn't around, that quiet, judging gaze that made me question my own sanity. I tried everything, bringing her gifts, inviting her to dinner, even asking her for advice about things I didn't need help with, just to make her feel included. But nothing worked. She always found a way to remind me that I was the outsider. One night, she called Daniel and said, "I think your wife forgot to thank me for the set of dishes I gave her." "I don't mind, of course. I know she's busy." I had thanked her. Twice. But from that day, Daniel started looking at me differently, like maybe I was the one causing problems. It was exhausting, walking on eggshells in my own marriage. Every family dinner turned into a performance. Margaret would make subtle comments like, "In my day, wives knew how to keep their husbands happy," or, "Some people just aren't raised to respect tradition." The guests would laugh politely, not realizing the barbs hidden in her words. But the worst part wasn't what she said. It was how Daniel never stopped her. He'd just sit there, staring at his plate, pretending not to notice. And every time he stayed silent, a small piece of my heart broke a little more. Still, I held on. I told myself she would soften with time, that she'd see how much I loved her son. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about love or acceptance. It was about control. Margaret wasn't protecting Daniel. She was protecting her power over him. And whether she realized it or not, she had just declared war on me. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet war, the one that started on my wedding day, would lead us both down a path darker than I could ever imagine. A path that would end in betrayal, revenge, and one unforgettable night at her own birthday party. The night I finally exposed my mother-in-law for who she really was. It didn't take long for the cracks to appear. Just a few weeks after the wedding, I started noticing small things, tiny comments, quick glances, moments that seemed harmless on the surface but carried a hidden sting. At first, I tried to ignore them. I told myself that adjusting to married life takes time, that it was normal for a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law to need space to understand each other. But the truth was, Margaret never wanted to understand me. She wanted to test me. The first argument happened over something as simple as dinner. I had spent the whole afternoon preparing a meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and Daniel's favorite dessert, lemon pie. When Margaret arrived, she sniffed the air, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, how lovely. You actually cooked." I nodded, trying to stay positive. "Yes, I wanted to surprise Daniel." She picked up a fork, poked the chicken, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Well, dear, it's a little dry. But it's your first time. I suppose it's acceptable." I felt my cheeks burn, but I smiled anyway. "Next time I'll try your recipe." She raised an eyebrow. "My recipe? Oh no, dear. Mine takes years to get right. You should probably stick to something simpler." Daniel laughed, thinking it was a joke. But to me, it didn't feel funny. It felt like the first warning, a quiet declaration of war. After that night, it became a pattern. Whenever I tried to do something nice for our home, she found a way to criticize it. If I cleaned the living room, she'd point at a corner and say, "You missed a spot." If I bought new curtains, she'd wrinkle her nose and say, "You have interesting taste." It was never enough. Nothing ever was. Daniel, of course, didn't see any of it. She was clever. She saved her sharpest words for when we were alone. And in front of him, she acted like the perfect, loving mother-in-law. She'd touch my hand and say, "Oh, I'm so lucky to have a daughter-in-law like you," while her eyes silently told me, "You'll never be one of us." One afternoon, I was folding laundry when I overheard her talking to Daniel in the living room. "I just worry about you," she said, her voice soft and trembling. "You look so tired, darling. She's not overworking you, is she?" Daniel chuckled. "No, Mom. She's fine. Because," she continued, "you've lost weight. I can see it. Maybe she's not feeding you properly." He laughed again, but I could tell he was thinking about it. And just like that, she planted a seed of doubt. Later that evening, when I brought dinner to the table, he hesitated. "Did you use salt this time?" he asked jokingly. I froze for a second. It was such a small question, but it broke something inside me. That's when I realized she was winning. Margaret had a way of twisting reality, like she was writing her own version of our lives. She'd drop little comments, half-truths, Subtle lies, and Daniel would believe her because she never gave him a reason not to. To him, she was still his loving mother. To me, she was a storm I couldn't escape. I started avoiding her, hoping the distance would help. But she noticed and used it against me. "Daniel," she said one evening over dinner, "I think your wife doesn't like me. I've tried so hard to be kind, but she avoids coming over." Daniel frowned. "That's not true, Mom." "Oh, I don't blame her," she said dramatically, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "I'm sure I'm just too old-fashioned." He took her hand, trying to comfort her, and I sat there watching as she played the victim, and he fell for it completely. From then on, every visit became a test of endurance. Her comments grew bolder. "You know," she told me once while sipping tea, "marriage is a job, and not everyone is qualified for it." Or, "A man needs a wife who reminds him of his mother, strong, patient, nurturing. Some women just don't have that instinct." I wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled, swallowed my pride, and changed the subject. She was too good at this. Every word, every pause, every gesture, it was all part of her silent campaign to turn Daniel against me. And the worst part, it was working. One morning, I woke up early to make Daniel's breakfast. He loved scrambled eggs with herbs, and I wanted to surprise him before work. As I reached for the eggs, I realized the fridge was almost empty. Strange, I had gone shopping the day before. Then I noticed something even stranger. Several items had been replaced. My fresh vegetables were gone, and in their place were new brands, different from the ones I usually bought. When Daniel came downstairs, he smiled. "Oh, Mom dropped by yesterday. She said she brought some groceries for us." I froze. She had keys to our house. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just invading my life emotionally, she was physically stepping into my home. That night, I told Daniel I didn't feel comfortable with her having a key. He looked at me like I'd insulted him. "She's my mother," he said coldly. "You're overreacting." "Daniel," I said softly, "she's crossing boundaries." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "She's just trying to help. You always think the worst of her." I didn't argue. I just turned away before he could see the tears in my eyes. The next day, I decided to confront her, politely, calmly. I drove to her house, rehearsing what I'd say. But when I arrived, she was already waiting at the door, smiling as if she knew I was coming. "Oh, dear," she said sweetly. "I was just thinking of you. Come in." Her living room was spotless, filled with photos of Daniel, but not a single one of me. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly. "Margaret," I began. "I wanted to talk about the house keys." She smiled. "Of course." I took a deep breath. "I think it would be better if you gave them back. It's not about you, it's just about privacy." Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes turned colder. "Privacy," she repeated slowly. "Interesting word. Are you hiding something?" "No," I said firmly. "I just want boundaries." She leaned forward, her voice quiet but sharp. "Let me give you some advice, dear. The moment you ask a man to choose between his wife and his mother, you've already lost." Her words hit me like a slap. I stood up, shaking. "That's not what I'm doing." She tilted her head. "Isn't it?" I left her house with my heart pounding. I didn't know it then, but that conversation marked the beginning of a long, silent war between us. A battle of whispers, manipulation, and pride. She would smile in public, but every gesture hit a blade. And slowly, she began turning everyone, not just Daniel, but the whole family against me. Family dinners became unbearable. Her sisters, cousins, even neighbors began making jokes about how city girls don't know how to take care of a man. Each time, she'd laugh and say, "Oh, don't tease her. She's still learning." And everyone laughed along, unaware that behind that sweet tone was pure poison. One night, after everyone left, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized myself. The woman staring back looked tired, smaller somehow, like she was fading from her own life. I promised myself I wouldn't let her destroy my marriage. But deep down, I knew the damage had already begun. Still, I didn't give up. I told myself there had to be a way to win her respect, to show her I was strong enough, patient enough, good enough. I tried everything. Kindness, silence, even distance. But nothing worked. Because Margaret didn't want peace. She wanted control. And I, the naive daughter-in-law, was still playing by the rules of love and decency, while she was playing a completely different game. What I didn't know then was that her game had just begun. And soon, those small conflicts would grow into something far darker, something that would tear our entire family apart. It's strange how control doesn't always come with shouting or arguments. Sometimes it's quiet, disguised as kindness, wrapped in care, hidden behind a smile. And that was exactly how my mother-in-law, Margaret, ruled our lives, through silent control. At first, I didn't even realize it was happening. There were no fights, no dramatic scenes. Just little moments that, at the time, didn't seem important. Like the way she'd rearrange our furniture when we weren't home, to make the house look more balanced, she'd say. Or how she'd call Daniel every single morning to ask what he was having for breakfast, as if he were still a child. One Sunday, I woke up early and went to the kitchen to make pancakes. I wanted to surprise Daniel. It was his favorite breakfast. But when I opened the cupboard, everything had been moved. The sugar was gone. The flour was in a jar I didn't own. And then I saw it, a note on the counter in her perfect cursive handwriting. I cleaned your kitchen. It was too cluttered. Love, Mom. My heart sank. She didn't ask. She didn't even tell me she was coming. She just did it. And when I told Daniel, he laughed softly. She's just trying to help, he said. You know how she is. Yes, I did. That was the problem. Margaret's help always came with invisible strings attached. If she bought groceries, she'd remind me later, in front of others. Oh, I'm just glad you two have something to eat. I remember when young wives struggled to manage a home. If she brought us dinner, she'd comment on how expensive ingredients were these days, then glance at me as if I were the reason for Daniel's financial stress. It was a slow, deliberate erosion. She wasn't attacking me directly. She was rewriting the story of our marriage, one subtle gesture at a time. She had a masterful way of placing herself between us, like a quiet wall that Daniel didn't even notice. If I planned something with him, she'd suddenly need him. Daniel, the garden hose burst again, she'd say on the phone. I try to fix it, but I can't do it alone. Or, my car won't start. Could you please come over? It'll only take a minute. And every time he went, because she had raised him to believe that her needs always came first. Soon, our evenings together became rare. I'd sit alone at the dinner table, the food getting cold, the candles burning out, while Daniel was fixing something at her house. And when he came home, tired and distracted, I didn't have the heart to argue. He'd kiss my forehead and say, "She just needs me right now. You understand, don't you?" And of course I nodded, because what else could I do? But I understood something else too. This wasn't about need. It was about possession. She couldn't stand seeing him build a life that didn't revolve around her. And I, as his daughter-in-law, was the living proof that he no longer belonged solely to her. The silent control became routine. She called every night, right before we went to bed. At first, it was to check in. Then, it became updates, requests, opinions. Daniel, have you thought about refinancing the house? Daniel, I saw your wife's post online. Maybe she should keep family matters private. Daniel, you've lost weight again. Are you eating properly? Each call was a drop of poison. And slowly, she was turning him into someone I barely recognized, quieter, distant, as if his heart was split between two worlds. I started keeping a small notebook, not to be paranoid, but to keep track of how often she interfered. In 1 week, she called 32 times. She visited unannounced 4 times. She left 6 helpful notes around the house. And somehow, Daniel saw none of it as a problem. Her power didn't come from what she said. It came from what she made others believe. In front of everyone else, she was the image of perfection. The generous mother who always brought homemade food, who prayed for her son's happiness, who just wanted peace in the family. She was so good at playing that role that even I started questioning myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was the problem. Until one evening, something changed. It was our anniversary. I had planned a small dinner at home, candles, music, Daniel's favorite wine. Everything was perfect. Then, just as we sat down, his phone rang. I didn't have to ask who it was. He looked at me apologetically. "It's Mom. I'll just be a minute." I nodded, forcing a smile, but as he walked into the other room, I could hear her voice through the speaker. She was crying. "Daniel, I fell. My ankle hurts. I don't think I can drive. Can you come help me?" He didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." And just like that, our anniversary ended before it even began. I sat there, staring at the candles as they melted into the tablecloth. A part of me wanted to believe it was an accident, that she truly needed help. But something deep inside whispered otherwise. She knew. She knew what day it was. And she couldn't stand not being the center of his attention. When he came home hours later, I asked gently, "How's your mom?" "She's fine," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Her ankle's just sore." Then I asked, "Did she fall inside the house?" He frowned. "No." She said she tripped near the mailbox. That's when I knew for sure. Margaret didn't fall. She staged it. The control she had wasn't loud, it was psychological. Every emotion she displayed, sadness, loneliness, weakness, was a carefully crafted weapon to keep Daniel bound to her. And no matter what I did, she always stayed one step ahead. I started losing sleep. Every night, I'd lie awake replaying her words, her tone, her smile. I began to dread the sound of the phone. When it rang, my stomach tightened because I knew it was her, and I knew she'd find another way to remind me how powerless I was in my own marriage. One morning, I found a message on her answering machine. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Daniel, I just wanted to thank you for checking on me last night. You're such a good son. I don't know what I'd do without you. Oh, and tell your wife I said hello. I hope she doesn't mind you spending so much time with me." Then she laughed, that quiet, satisfied laugh that only I could hear. I stood there, frozen. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, as if she was marking her territory, reminding me that no matter what, Daniel would always belong to her first. From that day, something inside me changed. I stopped trying to win her approval. I stopped playing her game of politeness and guilt. But I didn't confront her, not yet, because I knew confrontation wouldn't work with someone like her. She didn't fight with words. She fought with control. So I decided to wait, to observe, to learn how she operated. And in that silence, I began to understand her patterns, the emotional traps, the false kindness, the timing of her accidents. Every gesture had a purpose. Every word was strategic. She wasn't just manipulating Daniel. She was orchestrating an entire illusion, one that made her look like a saint and me like the ungrateful daughter-in-law. The deeper I looked, the more I realized how dangerous her control really was. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about fear. She needed him, not as a son, but as proof that she still mattered, that she still had someone to command, someone to depend on. And I was just the intruder who had accidentally broken her spell. From that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would find a way to break free, not by arguing, not by begging, but by understanding her game better than she did. Because I knew something she didn't. Control can't last forever. Eventually, the truth finds its way out. And when it did, I would be ready. It was subtle at first. The way Daniel's smile would falter when Margaret was around. The way he'd glance at me with a mixture of guilt and confusion that made my stomach twist into knots. At the beginning, I told myself it was normal. Marriage isn't easy. Every couple fights. Every couple compromises. But deep down, I knew that this was different. This wasn't about normal disagreements. This was the slow, creeping erosion of trust, love, and intimacy orchestrated quietly by someone who didn't want to see us happy. We tried to hold on to the routines that used to bring us joy, movie nights, walks in the park, even simple breakfast together, but each moment was shadowed by her presence, even when she wasn't there. It was as if Margaret's voice lingered in the air, reminding Daniel of his duties, his obligations, his loyalty to her. Sometimes, he would say things like, "I think my mom is right, you know. Maybe you should." And I would stop him mid-sentence, my hands trembling, my voice barely audible. "No. Don't let her control us." But the words didn't sink in. She had already built her invisible prison around us, and Daniel didn't even realize he was inside. Dinner became a battlefield. One evening, I spent hours preparing a special meal, something I thought would rekindle the warmth in our home. Candles were lit, the table set with our finest plates, music playing softly in the background. I walked in with the food, heart pounding with hope, only to see Daniel staring at his phone. "She called," he whispered. "Mom, she says she's feeling lonely tonight." I watched him debate internally, the love for his mother wrestling with the love for me. And then he stood up. "I'll just check on her. I'll be right back," he said. That night, our anniversary dinner ended in silence. The candles flickered and died, leaving only shadows in the room. Arguments began to erupt over the smallest things. If I suggested we spend a weekend alone, he would hesitate. "She might be upset if we go," he'd say. "She's my mother. I can't just leave her," he would add, as if our marriage was secondary to her whims. And I started to feel invisible, a ghost in my own home. Communication broke down. When I tried to express my feelings, Daniel would listen politely but never respond fully. "I just don't understand her like you do," he'd say. And I realized he didn't need to understand her, he needed to believe her. Every word I spoke, every emotion I displayed, was filtered through the lens of her manipulation. I wasn't speaking to him anymore. I was speaking to her through him. Sleep became my enemy. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the faintest sound of a phone vibrating, imagining Margaret's soft voice echoing through the walls, and replaying every conversation Daniel had with her in my mind. Every sentence, every pause, every laugh she made on the other end of the line haunted me. She wasn't just in our home physically, she was inside our marriage, whispering into the very fabric of our relationship. The emotional distance grew like a canyon between us. We would sit on the couch, side by side, barely touching, barely speaking. Sometimes, I would reach for his hand, longing for the warmth I used to feel. But he would pull back subtly, unconsciously, conditioned by years of maternal influence, as if even physical affection needed her permission. There were moments when I tried to fight back. I would plan trips, surprise gifts, and romantic evenings, hoping to remind him, and myself, that we were a team. But every effort was met with subtle sabotage. "She's trying too hard." I'd hear from Margaret through Daniel, often relayed without malice but with devastating effect. "Maybe she should relax a little, let things happen naturally," he'd say, echoing her voice. Even my love had become a weapon in her hands, twisted and redirected back at me. The stress of this silent war began to show physically. I stopped sleeping well. I lost weight. I became irritable, withdrawn, and constantly anxious. Every knock on the door, every phone call, every text sent my heart racing, not with excitement, but with dread. Because I knew it could be her, and I knew she would always find a way to assert control. One afternoon, I confronted Daniel after weeks of bottled-up frustration. "Daniel," I said, voice shaking, "we can't keep living like this. Your mother is. She's controlling everything. It's ruining us." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Margaret she worries about us. That's all," he said. "No, Daniel," I snapped. "It's not care anymore. It's manipulation. Can't you see it?" He looked at me, his expression torn. I don't know. She's my mother. "And I'm your wife," I whispered. "Doesn't that mean anything?" He didn't answer, and that silence said more than words ever could. Friends started noticing, too. They would ask why Daniel seemed distant, or why I was always tense. I would smile, deflect, make excuses. No one knew the full story. No one could, because Margaret's control was invisible, subtle yet absolute. It was in the way she whispered into his ear, in the way she painted me as the problem, in the way she slowly rewrote the narrative of our marriage so that the blame always landed on me. We tried therapy. We sat with a counselor for months, desperately trying to repair the connection that was slipping through our fingers. But even there, her influence lingered. Daniel would defend her actions before she had even done anything, repeating her justifications like a mantra. "It's just the way she is," he'd say. And in that moment, I realized that the crisis wasn't temporary. It was systemic. Margaret's silent control had taken root so deeply that it had poisoned the foundation of our marriage. By the time our first anniversary passed, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I watched him interact with her, saw how he deferred to her opinions, how he prioritized her over me, and I began to understand the magnitude of what we were facing. Our marriage wasn't just strained, it was under siege, a quiet war fought with words, gestures, and invisible boundaries. Every day, I felt myself being pushed further away, as if I were slowly losing not just my husband, but my own sense of self. It wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. She timed every call, every visit, every comment to maximize its effect. She knew our routines, our schedules, our weaknesses, and she exploited them with patience, precision, and the cold smile of someone who always wins. By now, I had stopped trying to change her. I had stopped trying to explain. I had stopped believing that my love alone could protect us. All I could do was watch, survive, and wait. Because I knew, somewhere, deep inside, that the war was far from over. And when the right moment came, I would find a way to take back what she had stolen. To take back Daniel. To take back my marriage. To expose her. The morning of Margaret's 60th birthday felt unusually quiet. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of early autumn leaves, and the sun peeked timidly through gray clouds as if nature itself knew something significant was about to unfold. I woke up early, my mind racing with thoughts about the party. This was supposed to be a celebration, a perfect birthday, as she had insisted for weeks. The house had to look flawless, flowers arranged just so, balloons tied to chairs, the cake displayed elegantly on the main table. But beneath the surface, I could feel the tension building like a storm on the horizon. I joined Daniel in the living room, where he was carefully setting up the decorations. He looked nervous, as if even he could feel the invisible lines Margaret had drawn between us. "I just hope everything goes smoothly," he said, fidgeting with a string of fairy lights. I tried to smile. "It will," I reassured him, though I didn't feel it. I had spent weeks planning every detail, the flowers, the music, the seating arrangement, and yet, no matter how perfect it looked, I knew it wouldn't be enough for her. Guests started arriving mid-afternoon. Friends, cousins, neighbors, and distant relatives trickled in, each one greeted with Margaret's impeccable smile and carefully practiced charm. She moved through the room like a queen inspecting her court, shaking hands, hugging relatives, and complimenting everyone on their attire. Everything was perfect on the surface. But I noticed the tiny cues, the slight twitch of her eyes when she saw me, the way her smile faltered ever so slightly when Daniel laughed at something I said. She was watching, always watching. I busied myself with the final preparations. The cake, a towering 3-tier masterpiece decorated with red and gold accents, gleamed under the soft lighting. I adjusted the tablecloth, fluffed the napkins, and checked the seating chart for the 100th time. It was immaculate. It was perfect. And yet, deep inside, I knew that perfection could never mask the truth hidden beneath Margaret's composed exterior. When she arrived, it was as if the entire room held its breath. Dressed in a deep crimson gown, pearls draped elegantly around her neck, she entered with the poise of someone who had spent decades mastering the art of charm and influence. Her eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on me, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The smile was there, polite, warm, controlled, but her gaze carried a weight I could not ignore. She was assessing, calculating, planning. Everything I had prepared for her birthday, the decorations, the cake, the music, was already part of her game. Daniel came to my side and whispered, "She looks happy, doesn't she?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure what happy really meant in this context. Margaret's happiness was never about joy, it was about control. About maintaining her position at the center of Daniel's world. And I, the daughter-in-law, was the unspoken threat she intended to remove, quietly, subtly, without ever appearing to be cruel. The party began with laughter and clinking glasses, toasts and hugs, as guests offered congratulations and gifts. Margaret accepted each gift with exaggerated gratitude, her eyes flicking toward me at every opportunity. I caught her observing how I interacted with Daniel, how I helped guests, how I arranged the tables and served drinks. It was as if she was mentally grading me, measuring every move, every smile, every word I said. At one point, she approached me while I was adjusting the flowers on the main table. "Oh, you've done such a lovely job," she said, her voice sweet as honey. I smiled politely, trying to hide the tension rising in my chest. But as she stepped closer, I felt the subtle edge beneath her words, the unspoken message that no matter how much effort I put in, it would never be enough. "It's nice," she continued, tilting her head and examining my work. "Yes, thank you," I replied softly, She lingered for a moment, then turned abruptly, as if she had inspected a painting and decided it wasn't quite perfect. As the afternoon progressed, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Guests were laughing and enjoying themselves, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling just beneath the surface. Margaret, meanwhile, seemed to thrive in her role as the orchestrator of the day, moving gracefully from group to group, charming everyone, asserting her presence without ever seeming overbearing. Her control was subtle, but it was absolute. When it was time for the cake, Daniel gathered everyone around the main table. The candles flickered, casting a warm golden glow across the room. Margaret looked radiant, her smile brighter than the lights above her. And yet, when she caught my gaze, I saw a flash of something darker, a hint of fear, perhaps, or a silent acknowledgement that her carefully constructed world might be vulnerable after all. I stepped forward, helping her with the candles. Her hands brushed mine, and I felt the faintest tension, a silent war waging between us in that simple touch. She leaned closer and whispered, "Thank you for doing this. It's very thoughtful of you." Her words sounded sincere, but her eyes betrayed her, calculating, sharp and cautious. It was the perfect facade, masking the complexity of the emotions beneath. The moment of truth came as the guests sang "Happy Birthday." Margaret's smile was wide, her posture flawless, but I could see the faint tremor in her hands as she clutched the edge of the table. The cake, the centerpiece of her celebration, symbolized more than sweetness and indulgence. It represented the control she had maintained over Daniel, over our family, over the entire narrative of her life. I stood next to her, silently observing, as the candles glimmered and the room filled with laughter. In that moment, I realized something important. Appearances can be deceiving. What seemed perfect on the outside, the laughter, the decorations, the cake, was fragile, a carefully curated illusion. And I, the daughter-in-law, had stumbled upon a subtle vulnerability that could change everything. As the last notes of a song faded, I caught Daniel's eye. He smiled at me nervously, sensing the tension I felt but unsure how to interpret it. I nodded ever so slightly, a silent promise forming in my mind. This was just the beginning, because beneath the glittering surface of a perfect birthday party lurked secrets, manipulation, and a truth Margaret had worked decades to keep hidden. And I knew that by the end of the evening, everything would change, our lives, our family, and the delicate balance of control she had so carefully maintained. For now, the party was perfect. But perfection, I realized, is only an illusion. And illusions are meant to be shattered. It was the quiet moments of the party that always held the most danger. While guests laughed, danced, and sipped wine, I found myself wandering toward the back of the room, drawn by a subtle curiosity I couldn't shake. Margaret had insisted everything be perfect. Every table arranged, every photo hung, every gift meticulously placed. But something about the cake table caught my attention. It wasn't the decorations, nor the glittering candles, nor even the perfectly stacked tiers of frosting. It was a slight tilt in one of the tablecloth folds, something that seemed off. I knelt down, tugging gently at the fabric, and my fingers brushed against a hard object hidden beneath the edge of the table. My heart started to pound. It was a photo album, old, worn, leather-bound, and tucked away as if someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. I glanced around. The room was full of people, all caught up in the celebration, laughing at stories, clinking glasses. No one seemed to notice me, kneeling quietly behind the cake table, my hands trembling as I opened the cover. Inside, the album was a portal to another time. Photographs lined the pages, each one more intimate and revealing than the last. There were pictures of family gatherings, holidays, casual moments that seemed harmless at first. And then, I saw it, a photograph of Margaret, smiling, younger than I had ever seen her, standing next to a man whose face made my stomach twist. A man I didn't recognize at first, until I noticed the resemblance in certain features, the jawline, the eyes, the same sharpness and expression that had always reminded me of my own father. The date was scrawled neatly in the corner, 9 months before I was born. I froze. My hands shook as I turned the page, half expecting it to be a trick, a mistake, some cruel coincidence. But there it was again, another picture, this time Margaret with my father, laughing, standing close, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The captions on the photos were brief but telling. Summer at the lake. Our secret adventure. Forever us. Every word, every image screamed a truth I wasn't ready to hear. And then I heard it, a sharp gasp behind me. "Put that down right now!" Margaret's voice sliced through the air, sharp and commanding, a mixture of panic and anger. I spun around to see her standing there, the perfect birthday facade shattered, her eyes wide, glinting with a mixture of fear and fury. It was too late. The album was in my hands. And the truth, a truth that had been buried under decades of smiles, politeness, and silent manipulation, was finally staring me in the face. She stepped forward, trying to reach for the album, her hands trembling, her composure cracking. "Give it back!" she whispered, almost pleading, almost commanding at the same time. I held it tighter. "No," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "I need to see everything." Daniel appeared at my side, confusion and concern etched across his face. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing from me to Margaret. She stepped back, trying to mask the panic, smoothing her dress, adjusting her necklace. Any distraction from the truth. But I could see it now, the cracks in her armor, the tension she had spent decades perfecting, the fear of exposure. I began flipping through the pages, my eyes scanning each photograph, each note, each hidden memory that had been tucked away like a time bomb. Every image told a story I had only guessed at until now. Every smile, every embrace, every subtle touch in those photographs was a clue, a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve, but now couldn't look away from. As the realization settled in, I felt a mixture of emotions, shock, confusion, anger, betrayal, and even a flicker of satisfaction. All those months of subtle manipulation, of silent control, of slowly eroding my marriage, all of it was connected. Margaret hadn't just been trying to control Daniel, she had been trying to control the narrative of my entire life. I looked at Daniel, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know who your mother really is?" He shook his head, stunned, still trying to process the tension and fear radiating from both of us. She's hiding something," I said, my fingers trembling as I turned another page. And there it was again, another photo, another piece of the puzzle. The timing, the people, the places, it all aligned in a way I could not ignore. Margaret's breathing grew shallow, her lips pressed tightly together, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if to anchor herself in reality. "You shouldn't be looking at this," she said, her voice a mixture of desperation and command. I shook my head. "I already am," I whispered, almost to myself. The party around us continued, oblivious to the storm brewing in this small corner of the room. Guests laughed, glasses clinked, music played softly in the background. But in that moment, time seemed to stop. It was just Margaret, Daniel, and me, and a photo album that held the keys to secrets long buried, truths carefully hidden, and a revelation that would change everything. I took a deep breath and slowly, deliberately, turned the final pages. And as I did, I realized something that made my heart pound faster than it ever had. This wasn't just about her manipulation. It was about a truth that could destroy everything. Our family, our past, our sense of who we were. Margaret's perfectly crafted world, the control, the facades, the silences, was unraveling in front of me, and I was the one holding the match. When I looked up, her expression had completely changed. No longer the poised, charming hostess. No longer the elegant, composed mother-in-law. She was exposed, terrified, vulnerable, human. I felt a strange surge of power, a sense of justice finally aligning after months of invisible battles. But even as the thrill coursed through me, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Because now that I knew the truth, I understood just how fragile our lives, our marriage, and our family really were. The album lay open on the table, its secrets spilled across the pages. And in that moment, I realized the night had only just begun. Everything would change, and no one would ever see Margaret the same way again. The moment I turned the page and saw it, time seemed to stop. It was there, a photograph hidden among dozens of ordinary family snapshots, carefully tucked away, almost like a secret she had never intended anyone to find. Margaret, younger than I had ever seen her, stood beside a man whose face sent a chill through my spine. The date in the corner was scrawled neatly, unmistakable, 9 months before I was born. My hands froze on the page. I couldn't breathe. I could barely comprehend what I was seeing. It wasn't just any photograph. It was a moment frozen in time that contained a secret capable of shattering our entire family. I stared at the photo, memorizing every detail. The way her hair fell across her shoulder, the curve of her smile, the slight bend of her fingers as she rested her hand on the man's arm. A man I had always thought was just a stranger in the context of family stories. But now, with the date staring back at me, the realization hit like a lightning bolt. This man could be my father. The air in the room thickened. The party continued around us, unaware, oblivious. Laughter echoed from the living room, the clink of glasses punctuating casual conversations. And there I was, kneeling behind the cake table, staring at the photograph as if it held the answers to my existence. I felt a surge of anger, disbelief, and confusion all at once. How could she keep something like this from me? How could she orchestrate decades of deception, manipulating Daniel, controlling my life, and hiding the truth of my very parentage? And yet, there it was, the forbidden photo, undeniable in its implication. Margaret's voice broke through the haze. "Give it back!" she demanded, her tone low but sharp, trembling with anger and fear. I looked up at her, my own pulse racing. "I can't," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I need to know. I need to understand." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I saw something raw, unmasked, a flicker of vulnerability beneath the poise she had worn for decades. "You have no idea what you're doing," she whispered, almost to herself, almost pleading. But I had an idea. I knew exactly what I was doing. I carefully examined every corner of the photograph. The background held clues, the type of furniture, the way the sun fell through the window, the subtle details that could place the photo in a specific time and location. Every little detail screamed authenticity. It wasn't staged. It wasn't fake. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A small inscription in faded ink at the bottom. "Forever and always, no one must know." The weight of that simple sentence hit me harder than any argument or confrontation could. She had spent years, decades even, ensuring that the secret remained buried. Every gesture, every act of helpfulness, every attempt to control Daniel, every subtle manipulation, all of it was to protect this single truth. Daniel appeared at my side, looking bewildered. "What is it?" he asked, glancing from the photo to Margaret. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "It's this. Look at it," I whispered, holding the photograph up carefully. His eyes widened as he scanned the image, and I could see his mind racing, connecting dots he had never thought to connect before. Margaret stepped closer, trying to intercept, trying to regain control. "Daniel, don't," she began, but her words faltered. The photograph was already in his hands. And in that instant, the truth could no longer be contained. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to anger, and finally to something I had never seen before, betrayal. He looked at Margaret, then at me, then back at her again. "You all these years," he stammered, his voice trembling. And Margaret, usually composed, poised, untouchable, had no words. Her facade cracked, revealing the raw, desperate fear of someone who had spent decades hiding a secret that was now exposed. I felt a strange mix of emotions, vindication, fear, and even a strange satisfaction. This forbidden photo was not just a piece of evidence. It was the key to everything. The manipulation, the control, the silent war she had waged over our marriage, over our lives, over our very identities. Guests were still milling around, oblivious to the tension that had exploded behind the cake table. But I didn't care about appearances anymore. I had the truth in my hands. And for the first time, I realized the power had shifted. Margaret's eyes glinted with something dangerous, a mix of rage and fear, the kind that only comes when someone realizes they are finally vulnerable. "You don't understand what you're doing," she hissed, but there was no denying the tremor in her voice. "I understand perfectly," I said, my gaze unwavering. "And now, everyone will see the truth." The photograph burned in my mind, every detail, every implication. I had spent months, even years, feeling powerless under her silent control. But now I held the ultimate weapon. I could feel the tension between Margaret and Daniel rising, electric, almost suffocating. Her manipulations, her lies, her careful orchestration of his loyalty, all unraveling with a single image. And as I looked at her, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The forbidden photo was more than a revelation. It was the turning point. Everything was about to change, and nothing would ever be the same. The room had grown strangely quiet. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft background music, all of it faded into a tense hush. I held the photo album tightly, the forbidden photograph pressed between my fingers like a loaded weapon. Margaret stood across from me, her crimson gown flawless, her pearls glinting in the soft light, but her carefully curated composure had crumbled. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm of fear and fury roiling beneath the surface. Daniel was caught in the middle, his face pale, eyes wide, mouth slightly open as he struggled to process what was happening. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, his voice shaking. Margaret's lips pressed tightly together, as if trying to force the words to stay inside. But they were too late. The truth, once captured in that photograph, could no longer be contained. I lifted the album, my voice steady, cutting through the charged silence. "This, Margaret, this is the truth you've been hiding all these years." Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered, almost pleading, almost commanding at the same time. "Yes," I said, opening the album to reveal the photo for all to see. Gasps echoed around the room. Guests who had been chatting, laughing, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension, froze in place. Eyes widened, hands covered mouths. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a sudden wave. Everyone could see Margaret's secret now, the photograph that disproved the carefully constructed narrative she had spent decades maintaining. Margaret stepped forward, trying to reclaim control, her voice rising. "You don't understand. You have no idea what you're saying." I didn't flinch. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice firm. "All these years, the manipulation, the control, it ends now." Daniel stepped closer to me, still staring at the photograph in disbelief. I had no idea," he said, turning toward Margaret. She tried to interject, but the words stumbled from her mouth, weak, unconvincing. Her entire life of orchestrated charm, subtle manipulation, and invisible control was crumbling before the eyes of our family and friends. I could see it in her expression, panic, fear, and anger all at once. Her facade of elegance and perfection shattered, leaving only raw vulnerability. "You think you can just expose me?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "I don't think," I replied. "I know. This is the moment you've been hiding from, the moment the truth finally comes out." Guests began to murmur, leaning closer, captivated by the unfolding drama. Margaret tried to regain her poise, smoothing her dress, adjusting her pearls, trying to act as if nothing had happened. But no one was fooled. The air was thick with tension, the kind of suffocating pressure that comes only when long-hidden secrets are finally revealed. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the photograph, his gaze alternating between me and Margaret. I don't know what to say," he admitted, voice breaking. "You don't need to say anything," I said gently. "You just need to see the truth." Margaret's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, for any sign of support, but it was too late. The witnesses were there. The family was there. The friends were there. And all of them saw the woman I had known as manipulative, controlling, and perfect for decades exposed. A long silence followed. Margaret's lips quivered, her hands shook, and finally, she sank into a chair, defeated, unable to maintain the illusion any longer. I felt a strange mix of emotions, vindication, fear, relief, and sorrow. She wasn't just my mother-in-law anymore. She was a flawed human, stripped of the armor she had spent her life crafting. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something that made my heart stop. You don't know what you've done." "Oh, I know exactly what I've done," I replied, my voice steady. "I've uncovered the truth you thought you could hide forever." Daniel finally spoke, his voice trembling but firm. "Mom, how could you keep this from me? From all of us?" Tears welled up in his eyes, his expression a mixture of grief and anger. Margaret looked at him, searching, pleading silently, but the moment had passed. Her power over him, over our marriage, had vanished in a single, devastating revelation. The guests were silent now, watching the scene unfold as if they were witnessing history in the making. Some whispered among themselves. Others stared wide-eyed, unable to look away. It was a spectacle, yes, but it was also deeply personal, a family secret brought into the open with all its weight and consequences. I closed the album slowly, my hands trembling slightly, but my heart steady. The forbidden photo, the secret Margaret had hidden for decades, had been revealed. And with it, the delicate balance of control she had wielded over our lives for so long was finally broken. Margaret's eyes locked with mine, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink around us. "You think this changes everything?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "Yes," I said softly, meeting her gaze. "It does. And now, you will have to face the consequences." Her face paled, and she sank back into her chair, powerless, defeated, and exposed. Daniel turned to me, his expression conflicted, relief, grief, and the weight of betrayal all mingling in his eyes. I felt a wave of emotion crash over me, anger, fear, satisfaction, and finally resolve. Because this confrontation wasn't just about a photograph. It wasn't just about Margaret's manipulations or control. It was about truth, justice, and finally reclaiming our lives from her invisible grip. I took a deep breath, glancing around the room at all the faces watching us, all the eyes that had witnessed the exposure of decades of secrets. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The story was far from over. Margaret had been exposed, yes, but she was clever, calculated, and dangerous. And what would happen next, after this confrontation, after the shock, after the truth was laid bare, was something none of us could predict. The forbidden photo had shattered the illusion. The confrontation had shifted the balance. And now, everything was up for grabs. The room was silent, the air thick with tension, and I felt a strange, thrilling certainty. The family, our marriage, and the very fabric of our lives would never be the same again. After the confrontation, the room seemed frozen in time. The music, once lively, had stopped, leaving only the faint hum of conversations that nobody wanted to speak. Guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, their eyes wide, unsure if they were intruding on something deeply private or witnessing a historical moment of reckoning. The cake, candles still half melted, stood as a silent witness to the storm that had erupted moments ago. Margaret sat in her chair, frozen, her hands clutched tightly in her lap, the elegance and poise she had carried for decades shattered like fragile glass. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Her eyes, dark and calculating only hours ago, now reflected fear, shame, and something darker, the realization that she had lost control. Her mouth opened as if to defend herself, but no words came. The silence in the room was suffocating, almost tangible, like a physical weight pressing against my chest. Daniel stood beside me, holding the photograph and the album like lifelines, his eyes darting between his mother and me. I could see the storm of emotions in him, disbelief, sorrow, anger, and a dawning understanding that the woman he had adored and obeyed all his life had secrets capable of destroying everything he had believed. For a long moment, nobody moved. I felt the tension cutting through the room, sharper than any argument, heavier than any physical confrontation. It was a silence that demanded acknowledgement, a silence that carried consequences in its very breath. Then, slowly, the whispers began. Guests exchanged murmurs, some curious, some shocked, some openly judgmental. Every voice in that room seemed to carry the weight of what had just been revealed. Yet Margaret said nothing. Her silence was deliberate, a final act of control even as her power crumbled. I felt a chill run down my spine. The deadly silence wasn't just absence of sound, it was the tension of a trap snapping shut. It was the knowledge that lives had shifted irreversibly in these few moments. Her silence screamed louder than any confession could. It was heavy, threatening, and suffocating. Daniel finally broke it. I can't believe this, he said, his voice trembling. Mom, how could you keep this from me? Margaret's lips pressed together, quivering. Her eyes darted across the room, searching, desperate, as if hoping to find an escape. But there was none. I felt a mix of triumph and fear. Triumph because the truth was finally revealed, because the control she had exercised over us for decades was now exposed. Fear because the aftermath of this revelation could spiral out of control. Her manipulations had never been just emotional. They had been strategic, calculated, and subtle in ways that could leave lasting damage. The guests looked at us, uncertain if they should intervene, comfort, or stay silent. Some backed away slowly, unwilling to step into the tension that hung like fog in the air. Others remained, silent witnesses to the unraveling of a family secret that had been buried for decades. Margaret's eyes finally met mine. There was no charm left, no subtlety, no elegance. Only raw, exposed desperation. You've destroyed everything," she said, her voice low and shaky. I met her gaze steadily. "No," I replied. "I've revealed the truth. And this silence, is the consequence of hiding it for so long." Daniel's gaze flickered between us. He seemed lost, caught between anger at his mother and gratitude for finally learning the truth. I don't even know what to say," he admitted, voice breaking. "You don't need to say anything," I whispered. "Just see what has been hidden, feel what has been kept from us, and understand that silence doesn't erase the past." The deadly silence stretched on, thickening with every passing second. It was more powerful than any shouting match, more destructive than any argument. It was a silence that demanded reflection, that forced the family to confront the reality that nothing would ever be the same. Margaret's posture grew smaller, her shoulders slumping, her head lowering. The power she had wielded through subtle manipulation, invisible control, and careful planning was gone. And yet, in that silence, there was still a lingering threat, a sense that she might strike back, in ways quiet, cunning, and devastating. I felt my own heart pounding. I realized that while the confrontation had shattered the illusion, the silence that followed was far more dangerous. It carried with it the weight of anticipation, the expectation of her next move, the fear of what she might do when she regained her composure, the unknown consequences of decades of buried secrets finally brought to light. Daniel stepped closer to me, and I could feel the tremor in his hands. We need to think about what happens next," he said softly. I nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "But for now, we survive the silence. We let it speak, because in its echo, the truth is undeniable." The guests slowly began to move, but none spoke louder than a whisper. The music never resumed. The clinking of glasses never returned. Margaret remained seated, pale, silent, and calculating even in defeat. Her deadly silence was the final act, a lingering presence that would haunt us, a quiet force capable of shaping the next steps in this fractured family drama. I realized then that revelation and confrontation were only the beginning. The silence that followed was heavier, sharper, more potent than words could ever be. It was the calm after the storm, not comforting but menacing. And it reminded me that every secret, every lie, every manipulation carries a weight that cannot be ignored. As I looked at Margaret, Daniel, and the room full of witnesses, I understood something crucial. The deadly silence is not empty. It is filled with consequences, judgment, and the haunting potential of what might come next. And in that silence, a new chapter was quietly beginning, one where the power dynamics had shifted, but the danger remained. The photograph, the album, the confrontation, all had led to this moment. And now, in the echoing quiet of a room frozen in tension, the family would have to face the truth in ways none of us could have anticipated. The deadly silence had fallen, and with it, the storm was far from over. The room was heavy with tension, the kind that presses on your chest and makes every breath feel measured, every movement deliberate. Margaret sat silently in her chair, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Daniel stood beside me, holding the photo album as though it were a shield, his jaw tight, his eyes wide with disbelief, sorrow, and the weight of betrayal. The guests, who had once arrived with laughter and congratulations, now lingered like spectators in a theater, holding their collective breath as the fragile walls of a family's carefully crafted life began to crumble. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, placing the album gently on the table so everyone could see it. "Everyone needs to understand what has been hidden," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the stillness. I found this, I continued, opening to the photograph that had sparked the confrontation, and it reveals the truth that Margaret has spent decades trying to hide. Gasps rose like waves through the crowd. Some guests took a step back. Others leaned forward, craning their necks to glimpse the image that had shaken the foundation of our family. Margaret's lips parted slightly, and I could see her pulse racing at her temples. She tried to speak, but no words came. Daniel's voice finally broke the silence, trembling but steady. "Mom, is this true?" Margaret's eyes darted to him, fear and panic mingling with anger. She began, then faltered. Her years of control, her careful orchestration of every detail, every relationship, every word, had built a fortress around this secret. But now that fortress was crumbling. I continued, my voice firm yet controlled. "This isn't just about a photo," I said. "It's about deception, manipulation, and years of hidden truths that have affected all of us. It's about trust, betrayal, and the choices that have shaped our lives without our knowledge." The guests were silent, the air thick with anticipation. Every eye in the room followed Margaret's every move. Every whisper, every slight movement carried weight. The forbidden photograph had sparked a chain reaction, a domino effect of revelations that could no longer be stopped. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for the album, but I stepped back, keeping it just out of her reach. "You don't understand," she said, voice low and shaking. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied. "I understand the truth you've tried so hard to hide, the control you've exerted, and the family you've tried to manipulate." Daniel took a step forward, voice quivering. "I trusted you," he said. "I loved you. And you kept this from me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, her carefully maintained poise now completely gone. I didn't want to hurt anyone," she whispered, almost as if pleading for forgiveness. But the room had already witnessed the consequences of her silence. I turned to the guests, my eyes sweeping across the room. "This isn't just my revelation," I said. "This is the truth for everyone here, a truth that has been buried for decades. Margaret's secrets have affected not just her family, but everyone she's touched. And now the truth is finally coming to light." The whispers grew louder as people murmured among themselves, processing what they had just seen. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others exchanged sympathetic glances. And through it all, Margaret sat frozen, the walls of control she had spent a lifetime constructing reduced to rubble in the space of a few devastating minutes. Daniel's hands tightened around mine, grounding me as I opened the album once more to show the hidden details, dates, names, moments carefully captured and meticulously concealed. Every photograph told a story, every note confirmed what had once only been suspected. The truth, undeniable and raw, spilled across the pages like a tidal wave. Margaret finally spoke, her voice low, almost pleading. "You don't know what you're doing. You're destroying everything." I met her gaze steadily, unflinching. "No," I said softly but firmly. "I'm revealing what you've tried to hide. The destruction was already there, built by decades of lies. All I've done is uncover it." Daniel stepped closer to his mother, his expression a mixture of grief, anger, and sorrow. "How could you keep this from me? From all of us?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she couldn't meet his gaze. The room was silent again, heavy with the weight of long-buried truths now forced into the open. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, vindication, fear, and even sorrow. Relief because the truth had finally been revealed, vindication because the manipulation that had haunted me for so long could no longer continue, fear because I knew that uncovering the truth was only the beginning, and sorrow because the family we had known would never be the same. The guests looked on, some whispering, others staring in stunned silence, as the full extent of Margaret's secrets became undeniable. She had tried to control the narrative, to shape every interaction, every memory, every relationship. But in the light of the photograph and the album, her power was gone. I closed the album slowly, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. "The truth is out," I said, "and now we have to face it together." Margaret's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her. Her eyes, once sharp and calculating, were now clouded with fear and resignation. Daniel's gaze softened slightly, but the hurt lingered, a painful reminder that the foundation of trust had been cracked, perhaps permanently. The room remained quiet, the air charged with tension. But in that silence, in that stillness, I could feel the first sparks of a new beginning. The truth had been revealed. The consequences would follow, and nothing would ever be the same again. The photograph, the album, the confrontation, the deadly silence, all had led to this moment. The truth had come to light, and now we would have to navigate the aftermath, the fallout, and the uncertain path ahead. Because once the truth is out, there's no turning back. The air outside was cold and heavy with rain, a reflection of the mood that had settled over our family in the wake of everything that had been revealed. The funeral was meant to be solemn, a chance to honor a life ended, yet beneath the surface, it felt like a battlefield of grief, regret, and unspoken truths. Margaret sat quietly in the front row, her face pale, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the weight of her secrets finally catching up to her in a way that no confrontation or photograph could undo. Her eyes were distant, haunted, as if the ghost of the past had followed her into the church, refusing to let her find peace. I stood beside Daniel, my hands lightly brushing his arm for reassurance. The air smelled faintly of flowers, incense, and damp earth, all the elements of a typical funeral, yet somehow heavier here, laden with the invisible tension that had grown over years of hidden truths. Family and friends filed in quietly, whispering condolences, exchanging glances filled with pity, judgment, or curiosity about what they had heard or seen in recent weeks. Even in mourning, there was no escaping the shadow of Margaret's long-hidden secrets. The coffin rested at the front of the church, polished and gleaming, a stark reminder of mortality and the fragile nature of life. I could see the reflection of the stained glass windows on its surface, colored shards of light falling across the polished wood like broken pieces of the past. Daniel's mother, the woman who had controlled, manipulated, and hidden truths for decades, was seated beside us, her expression unreadable yet tense. She didn't speak, didn't smile, and didn't cry openly. Her silence was almost as loud as the whispered eulogies being read, each word reminding us that life had moved on, yet some scars were far from healed. As the officiant began speaking, recounting the life of the deceased, memories flooded the room. I could see family members nodding in recognition, some wiping tears, others stiff with sorrow. But beneath the surface of this grief, I could feel the lingering weight of betrayal, secrets, and unanswered questions. The funeral was not just about mourning, it was a reflection of everything that had happened before, the photo, the confrontation, the truth laid bare, and how those revelations had reshaped the bonds between us. Margaret shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. There was no apology, no explanation, only a fleeting glimpse of recognition that her actions had consequences. I felt a mix of emotions, pity, anger, and a strange sense of closure. She had wielded control for decades, but now she was powerless in the face of death, truth, and the unyielding reality of her own choices. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he gripped the program, his eyes fixed on the coffin. I placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, trying to offer some sense of stability amidst the emotional chaos. He exhaled slowly, his grief mingled with frustration and lingering questions. "How could this have happened?" he murmured, almost to himself. I didn't answer. Some questions, I realized, weren't meant to be answered aloud. As the officiant called for final respects, family members approached the coffin one by one. They touched it, whispered private words, left flowers, and slowly stepped back, each carrying their own mix of sorrow, guilt, and reflection. When it was our turn, Daniel and I stepped forward together. I could feel the rain beginning to fall outside, small drops tapping against the windows, a natural echo of the tears that none of us fully released yet. We lowered the flowers onto the coffin, a quiet symbol of love, respect, and the fragile attempts to honor a life gone by. Margaret remained seated, her posture stiff, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the room, as if trying to escape the weight of everything she had concealed. There was no reconciliation here, only the raw, undeniable reality of the choices made, the secrets kept, and the consequences that had followed. The eulogy continued, but my mind drifted back to the events that had led to this moment. The photo album, the forbidden photograph, the confrontation, all had contributed to this complex emotional tapestry. I realized that funerals are rarely just about the person who has passed. They are about the living, the fractured connections, and the truths that cannot be ignored. Margaret's silence during the ceremony was almost deafening. I could see her lips moving slightly, perhaps mouthing words she would never speak aloud. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, aware that beneath the veneer of grief lay tension, unresolved questions, and lingering resentment. Her control, once so absolute, had dissolved in the wake of exposure and now confronted mortality itself. Daniel leaned closer to me, whispering, "We'll never be the same, will we?" I shook my head slowly. "No," I replied softly. "The truth has changed everything." As the final prayers were said, the coffin was slowly wheeled out, flowers trailing behind it like fragile remnants of a past that could never be fully repaired. We followed quietly, the rain outside falling harder now, drumming against the roof like a relentless reminder of life's relentless progression. Even in mourning, there was a sense of revelation, a realization that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of coming to light. Margaret's face remained pale and tight, her eyes shadowed with the recognition of what her deception had cost, not just in relationships, but in trust, love, and respect. The funeral was over, but its echoes lingered. Every whispered comment, every sideways glance, every quiet tear was a reminder that the family had been reshaped, irrevocably altered by the revelations that had preceded this day. As we walked outside, the sky opened fully, rain cascading down in torrents, washing over the mourners like nature's own cleansing. Yet no amount of water could wash away the truth, nor the tension that had settled deep within the family. We were all changed, each step carrying the weight of secrets now laid bare, each glance toward Margaret a reminder of power lost and control shattered. The funeral had been a ceremony of grief, yes, but it was also a mirror, reflecting the reality of choices made, deception kept, and consequences endured. And as the crowd dispersed, whispers of judgment and speculation trailing behind them, it became clear. Life would continue, but the family would never return to the innocence it once had. Margaret's manipulations, her carefully constructed lies, and the forbidden truths had left permanent scars, and the shadows of those scars would linger long after the rain had stopped. The coffin was lowered into the ground, finality etched into every movement, every tear, every whispered prayer. And as I stood there, Daniel beside me, I realized something profound. The past may be gone, but the truths we uncover define the present, and the path forward is never the same once the skeletons are out of the closet. The funeral ended, but the story was far from over. The family had survived the storm, but the echoes of betrayal, exposure, and silent manipulation would ripple through our lives forever. The funeral had left a heavy silence over our family, a stillness that wasn't peace. It was the calm before a storm. Inside me, anger and resolve churned like a raging river. I knew that Margaret's control, her manipulations, her carefully orchestrated web of lies, couldn't go unchallenged. She had spent decades undermining my marriage, clouding Daniel's perception, and twisting our lives to suit her desires. And now, with the truth exposed, it was time to ensure she could never harm us again. I sat alone in the living room that evening, the rain tapping against the windows, reflecting the storm in my mind. The photograph, the album, the confrontation, the funeral, all of it weighed heavily, yet the clarity of purpose I felt now was sharp, almost electrifying. I thought about every slight, every subtle manipulation, every whispered suggestion Margaret had ever made that tried to bend our lives to her will. I recalled her quiet demands, her imperceptible control over family decisions, her ability to turn even simple events into lessons of obedience. Every one of her actions, intentional or unconscious, had led to this moment, and I could no longer let her dictate the rules. Daniel entered the room quietly, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I can't believe she did all this," he murmured, voice heavy with a mixture of grief and lingering disbelief. "I know," I said softly, "but she underestimated us. She didn't count on us finally seeing clearly." He nodded, a spark of determination appearing in his eyes. "We have to make sure she can't do this again," he said. I smiled faintly, a combination of relief and anticipation, knowing he understood what had to be done. The plan was not about revenge in a petty sense. It was about justice, balance, and reclaiming control over the family she had manipulated for so long. Every step needed to be calculated, precise, and impossible for her to anticipate. I spent hours mapping out the dynamics of her influence, from friends who unknowingly carried her messages, to family members still loyal to her, to the financial threads she had woven behind the scenes. Every detail, every connection, every weakness would become a piece of the puzzle. I thought back to her smug smile during the confrontation, the way she had tried to reclaim authority even as the truth emerged. That arrogance, that overconfidence, was her greatest flaw. It was what made her vulnerable now, what made her predictable. And I intended to use it against her. The first step of the plan involved observation. I needed to know her patterns, her routines, who she confided in, and where her influence ran strongest. I watched how she interacted with friends and family after the funeral, noting subtle changes in her posture, in her tone, in the way she tried to assert authority without seeming too overt. Even her silence, once a tool of intimidation, now revealed cracks, hesitation, discomfort, fear of exposure. Every detail added to the map of her control, a blueprint for dismantling it completely. Next came careful communication. Daniel and I spoke in whispers and discreet signals, sharing what we knew and what we observed. Every piece of information was cataloged, analyzed, and used to anticipate her moves. We identified allies, family members who had sensed her manipulation but had never spoken, friends who had witnessed subtle injustices, and even Margaret's own confidants who were quietly loyal to fairness rather than deception. These alliances were crucial. We didn't need more confrontation, we needed leverage. Then came timing. The key to our revenge plan wasn't rash action, it was precision. We waited for events where Margaret felt confident, where her influence seemed unchallenged. A birthday gathering, a family dinner, any social event where she expected admiration and compliance became an opportunity for exposure, carefully orchestrated, undeniable, and humiliating in its inevitability. I recall the forbidden photograph, the confrontation at the birthday party, the funeral, all moments that had given me insight into her behavior. Each was a template for action. Know her habits, exploit her expectations, and reveal the truth at the moment it would hit hardest. But unlike before, this time I wouldn't leave anything to chance. Every detail would be planned, rehearsed mentally, and executed with precision. Daniel and I created a detailed timeline. We marked critical dates, noting anniversaries, family events, and social gatherings where Margaret would feel secure. We plotted the sequence of reveals, small truths first to unsettle her, then the undeniable evidence, the photograph, her past manipulations, her subtle lies, strategically deployed to maximize impact. This was not just about exposing her, it was about reclaiming our lives, securing the truth, and ensuring the family could no longer fall under her shadow. The emotional stakes were immense. I thought about the years of subtle manipulation, how she had influenced decisions about weddings, finances, holidays, even parenting choices. I thought about Daniel's shock, the pain in his eyes, the betrayal we both felt. And I realized revenge in its raw form wasn't the goal. Justice, clarity, and restoration of agency were. Margaret's control over our lives had been built on secrecy and intimidation, and the plan I crafted would strip that control completely. I also considered her potential moves. Margaret was clever, meticulous, and emotionally cunning. She might attempt denial, diversion, or even guilt-tripping to regain influence. Every possible response was analyzed, with contingencies ready. We weren't just reacting, we were predicting, outmaneuvering, and preparing to neutralize her manipulations before they could take root again. Night after night, I rehearsed conversations, scenarios, and outcomes in my mind. I imagined her smug expression faltering as truths were revealed in front of witnesses. I imagined the subtle, almost imperceptible gasps of recognition as friends and family realized the depth of her control. And most importantly, I imagined the liberation, the feeling of finally dismantling decades of manipulation and reclaiming life unshackled from her invisible chains. The plan wasn't impulsive. It was deliberate, methodical, and deeply satisfying in its precision. Every move was calculated, every conversation planned, every action measured to ensure maximum impact. I knew the emotional fallout would be intense. Margaret's denial, anger, and desperation would be formidable, but I was prepared. For the first time in years, I felt empowered, not by anger, but by clarity and purpose. The revenge plan, as I saw it, wasn't just about Margaret. It was about restoring balance, repairing our fractured family, and reclaiming agency over the lives she had tried to dominate. It was about ensuring that her manipulation could no longer dictate our choices, influence our decisions, or undermine our happiness. The foundation was set. The alliances were in place. The evidence was undeniable. And now, it was only a matter of timing, executing the plan when the stage was perfectly aligned, ensuring that Margaret's control would be permanently dismantled, and the truth would finally reign unchallenged. As I sat late that night, reviewing every detail, imagining every step, I felt a strange exhilaration. This wasn't petty revenge, it was strategic justice. And when the moment arrived, the impact would be complete. Margaret would no longer hold power over us. Her era of manipulation and silent control was over. And yet, beneath the excitement and resolve, a small, gnawing tension remained. I knew she could strike back in ways we didn't expect. I knew her cunning and subtlety were not to be underestimated. But for the first time, Daniel and I were ready. The game was set, the pieces were in motion, and the final act of exposure and justice was about to unfold. The revenge plan was no longer a thought. It was a strategy. It was a mission. And it was unstoppable. The day of the birthday party arrived like a storm hiding behind sunlight, bright, cheerful, full of decorations, yet charged with anticipation and tension that only I could feel. The house smelled of fresh flowers, sweet pastries, and polished wood, the very image of celebration masking the invisible battlefield that had been quietly laid. Guests arrived, laughing, greeting each other warmly, unaware that the event they were attending was about to become a stage for the ultimate revelation. Margaret moved through the crowd gracefully, her crimson dress shimmering under the warm lighting, pearls glinting with each subtle movement, completely unaware that her carefully constructed facade was about to collapse. I stood in the corner with Daniel, my heart pounding with controlled intensity. The revenge plan had been rehearsed mentally countless times, every step, every reaction anticipated. I glanced at the hidden photograph in my bag, the one that had started this chain of revelations. It was time. Every manipulated word, every subtle lie, every secret she had buried for decades would now be revealed in front of everyone who had once been blind to the truth. Margaret laughed, a soft, elegant sound, mingling with the chatter of guests and the clinking of glasses. Her confidence was palpable. She believed she was untouchable. I could almost see the thought process in her eyes. Everything is perfect. Everyone adores me. Nothing can go wrong. Little did she know, the foundation she trusted so fully was about to crumble beneath her feet. As the first toast was proposed, I moved closer to the table where the cake stood, its frosting sparkling, candles flickering. I picked up the photo album subtly, pretending to adjust its placement, but in reality, I was positioning the weapon that would strip Margaret of her illusions. Daniel followed my lead, nodding slightly, silently acknowledging that we were about to execute the plan we had painstakingly devised. I cleared my throat, drawing just enough attention to myself without alarming Margaret. I was helping Daniel earlier with some decorations. I began softly, enough for nearby guests to hear, and we found something interesting, something that I think everyone should see. Margaret froze mid-laugh, her hand tightening around her glass. Her eyes flicked toward me, confusion crossing her elegant features. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice smooth, though a faint tremor betrayed her anxiety. I opened the album slowly, deliberately, exposing the pages with careful precision. The forbidden photograph, the one that had caused the confrontation, the tension, the deadly silence, came into view. Gasps rippled across the room. Friends, family, and even casual acquaintances leaned closer, drawn to the drama unfolding in a way they hadn't anticipated. Margaret's lips parted, and for a fleeting moment, her carefully maintained poise vanished entirely. Daniel stepped forward, holding the photograph so all could see. "Mom," he said, voice tight, This is the truth. Everything you've hidden for years." The room fell into a stunned hush, the only sounds being shallow breaths and the faint flicker of candle flames. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached toward the album, but I pulled it slightly back, keeping control of the narrative. "You don't get to touch this," I said softly, but with authority. Her face paled, her elegance slipping away into raw panic. I don't understand," she exclaimed, her voice cracking despite years of practiced composure. "Yes, you do," I replied steadily, opening the album to additional pages with notes, dates, and subtle clues she had left unguarded over the years. Every page told a story, every image confirmed the manipulation, every written detail revealed her invisible control over our lives. The guests murmured in disbelief. Some whispered, others gasped, and a few exchanged glances of shock and judgment. Margaret's eyes darted to them, silently pleading for loyalty or denial, but no one came to her defense. The truth was undeniable. The web she had spun for decades had unraveled in minutes, exposed to everyone who had once seen her as perfect, elegant, and untouchable. I continued, my voice growing slightly stronger, commanding the room's attention. "This isn't just a photograph," I said. "It's a record of deception, control, and lies that affected everyone here, our family, our choices, and our lives." Margaret's breath hitched. She tried to regain composure, smoothing her dress, adjusting her pearls, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But the damage was done. Daniel held the photograph higher, his expression a mixture of grief and quiet satisfaction. "I trusted you," he said, turning to face his mother directly. "You kept secrets from me, from all of us, and today we see the truth." Her mouth opened as if to respond, to manipulate, to charm, but no words could undo the exposure. The silence that followed was louder than any argument, thicker than any confrontation. It was the sound of power stripped away. Guests began to whisper, some pointing discreetly, others staring openly. Margaret's eyes flicked around, desperate for support, for an escape, for anything that could undo the inevitable. But there was none. Allies she had assumed would defend her were paralyzed by the undeniable truth. Her public exposure was complete, and with it, the invisible grip she had held over our family and friends evaporated like smoke. I closed the album slowly, letting the significance of the moment settle over everyone. "This is the truth," I said firmly, locking eyes with Margaret. "You controlled us with secrets, but now everyone knows. Your era of manipulation is over." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes, but there was also relief, a cathartic sense that the family could finally breathe without the weight of her hidden influence. Margaret's face turned pale, her composure fractured entirely, the carefully curated mask of elegance gone forever. Even her smile, once radiant and unassailable, had crumbled under the collective gaze of truth and judgment. The party continued, but nothing was the same. Conversations carried a new tension. Laughter felt hollow, replaced by the unspoken acknowledgement of what had just transpired. Margaret moved among the guests, attempting to regain dignity, but every glance she met was a reminder of her failure, exposure, humiliation, and the irreversible revelation of her control. I could feel the satisfaction, quiet yet profound, as I watched the plan we had meticulously crafted unfold flawlessly. This was not mere revenge. It was justice, visibility, and the restoration of balance to a family long manipulated by hidden truths. Margaret's reign of control had ended, and the consequences would ripple through our lives forever. And yet, in the back of my mind, a subtle tension remained. She was clever, cunning, and unpredictable. Even exposed, even humiliated, Margaret was far from powerless, and I knew that the final chapter of this family drama was still waiting to be written. But for now, in this room, amid the flickering candles, the murmuring guests, and the now visible truths, the public exposure had achieved its purpose. Margaret's secrets were laid bare, her control shattered, and the family, finally, could begin to heal. The party had ended, leaving the house eerily quiet. The decorations, once vibrant and celebratory, now seemed to mock the chaos that had unfolded only hours earlier. Candles flickered in the corners, their warm light casting long shadows on the walls, shadows that felt like ghosts of the lies and manipulation that had just been exposed. Guests had left, some in hushed whispers, others in stunned silence, carrying with them the shock and curiosity of witnessing the unraveling of a family secret that had lain hidden for decades. I walked through the living room, my footsteps soft against the polished wood floors. The remnants of the birthday celebration, empty glasses, half-eaten pastries, discarded napkins, were scattered around, silent witnesses to the dramatic exposure that had shifted the balance of power in our family forever. Daniel trailed behind me, his face a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and lingering grief. He had been by my side throughout the confrontation, and though the satisfaction of exposing Margaret was immense, the emotional weight of everything that had come to light pressed heavily upon us both. Margaret sat alone in the far corner, her shoulders hunched, the elegance of her red dress contrasting sharply with the fragility of her demeanor. She had said nothing since the moment the album and photograph were revealed, her pride and composure stripped away by the undeniable exposure of decades-long manipulation. Her eyes, once sharp and commanding, were now clouded with fear, sorrow, and the faintest hint of desperation. It was a quiet kind of defeat, more terrifying than anger, more revealing than any public confrontation could have been. I approached her cautiously, not with malice, but with a steady resolve that had guided me throughout this journey. "Margaret," I said softly, "it's over. The truth is out, and there's nothing more you can hide." Her gaze met mine for a brief, fleeting moment, a mixture of defiance and resignation flickering across her face. I didn't want this," she whispered, her voice barely audible, fragile as glass. "But you had no choice," I replied gently, "because the truth always finds a way." Daniel sat beside me, silent but attentive, his hand lightly brushing mine in support. We both understood that this silence was not peaceful. It was charged with a residue of years of deceit, control, and hidden manipulation. It was the calm that follows a storm, yes, but also the quiet moment in which the consequences of past actions begin to take shape in ways we cannot yet predict. The house, once alive with laughter, chatter, and the rhythm of family life, now felt like a sanctuary of reflection. Every room seemed to echo with the tension of what had just transpired, the invisible threads of Margaret's control finally severed. Yet, even as relief settled in, a subtle undercurrent of uncertainty lingered. Would Margaret attempt to regain influence? Could the cracks in the family's foundation be fully repaired? And most importantly, how would we navigate a life forever altered by the revelation of truth? I moved toward the kitchen, where the last remnants of the party were being cleared away. The faint scent of vanilla and frosting lingered, mingling with the earthy aroma of rain that had begun falling outside. Daniel followed silently, his mind undoubtedly replaying the events of the day, the confrontation, and the expressions on the faces of those who had witnessed Margaret's unraveling. We didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. The silence itself held meaning, a shared acknowledgement of the storm that had passed, and the cautious hope that the worst was finally behind us. Margaret's figure remained in the corner, still seated, still silent. Her presence was a reminder of the fragility of control, the power of secrets, and the inevitability of truth. Even in her quiet, there was tension, an unspoken awareness that her influence had been broken, yet her potential for subtle retaliation had not been completely erased. The storm had passed, yes, but the echoes of its fury remained, lingering in every glance, every breath, every quiet corner of the house. I walked toward the window, peering out at the rain-soaked garden, where droplets clung to the leaves like tears. The world outside seemed calm, serene, almost untouched by the upheaval within these walls. But inside, the family had changed irrevocably. Trust would need to be rebuilt, boundaries redrawn, and the shadow of Margaret's manipulation confronted at every turn. This silence was both a relief and a warning, a reminder that even in the absence of chaos, the past leaves its mark on the present. Daniel joined me at the window, and we stood together, observing the quiet rainfall. It was a moment of reflection, of mourning for the innocence lost, and of contemplation for the future we would now face. "Do you think it will ever be normal again?" he asked quietly, his voice barely rising above the sound of rain. I shook my head gently. "Normal? No. But honest? Yes," I replied. "And sometimes, honesty is better than normal." The hours passed slowly, the house emptied of guests, the candles burned down to stubs, and the echoes of a storm outside merged with the silence within. Margaret had not moved, had not spoken, had not protested. She seemed almost a shadow of herself, a reminder of the consequences that come from a life built on secrets and control. I finally spoke to Daniel, my voice steady but soft. "We've survived the storm," I said. "The exposure, the confrontation, the funeral, it's all behind us. But the real work begins now. Healing, rebuilding, and ensuring that no one can ever manipulate us like that again." He nodded, understanding fully the weight of what had been done and the challenges ahead. Margaret's eyes followed us as we spoke, a mixture of fear, regret, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of comprehension passing over her features. She had been dethroned, stripped of power, and yet her presence still reminded us that vigilance was necessary, that the aftermath of exposure is rarely simple or peaceful. The silence after the storm was complete, yet it was a silence charged with tension, reflection, and the cautious hope that life, finally, could be reclaimed on our terms. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the day settle. The storm had passed, Margaret's control shattered, and the family had begun to breathe again. But the silence reminded me that the consequences of revelation linger, that even in quiet, the echoes of truth, betrayal, and manipulation continue to shape lives. And so, as rain fell softly outside and the house lay in stillness, I realized that survival was not about returning to the past. It was about navigating the present with clarity, purpose, and the understanding that truth, once revealed, demands attention, courage, and the willingness to face the shadows left behind. The silence after the storm was profound, heavy, yet full of possibility. Margaret could no longer control us, but the path forward would require care, strength, and unwavering honesty. It was the beginning of a new chapter, fragile, uncertain, yet finally unshackled from the weight of secrets and deception. And in that quiet, I felt it. The first true breath of freedom, the gentle promise of healing, and the understanding that even after the darkest storms, life can continue, if only we are brave enough to face it. The days after the public exposure were quieter than I had imagined, yet they carried a weight far heavier than any storm we had weathered before. The family had survived the confrontation, the funeral, and the revelation, but survival did not erase the consequences of decades of manipulation and deceit. Margaret, once the unshakable center of control, had been dethroned, her elegance replaced by a fragile, almost haunted presence. Even in her silence, I could feel the tension she carried, the quiet realization that truth, once unleashed, exacts a price no one can escape. Daniel and I moved cautiously through the aftermath, rebuilding the fragments of family trust piece by piece. We spoke more openly than ever before, our conversations raw, unfiltered, and filled with the vulnerability that comes from facing betrayal head-on. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her," Daniel admitted one evening, his voice heavy with the weight of grief and relief intertwined. "You don't have to," I replied gently. "But understanding the truth, fully and without fear, is how we begin to heal." Margaret had retreated into herself, her once commanding presence diminished by the revelation that had stripped her of power. Family gatherings became exercises in quiet observation, the space once dominated by her subtle manipulations now feeling strange and uncertain without her invisible hand guiding every decision. Yet, even as the family navigated this new dynamic, the lingering tension reminded us all that truth comes with consequences, some visible, some hidden, but all unavoidable. I reflected on the photograph, the album, and the confrontation that had started this journey. The moment of exposure had been triumphant, cathartic, and necessary, but it had also brought pain, sorrow, and irreversible change. Family bonds were tested, relationships strained, and the innocence we had once taken for granted was gone forever. Truth is rarely free. It carries with it responsibility, the burden of acknowledgement, and sometimes the cost of losing the comfort of ignorance. Margaret remained in the background during family meals, her voice seldom raised, her expressions guarded. The aura of dominance she once wielded effortlessly had vanished, replaced by a quiet, almost tentative presence. I sensed her internal struggle, the tension between shame, defiance, and the faint hope that reconciliation might be possible, though fragile. It was a reminder that while truth can liberate, it can also leave wounds that time alone may not fully heal. Our family slowly began to navigate a new equilibrium, learning to interact without the invisible strings Margaret had once pulled. Daniel smiled more freely now, laughter returning to his eyes after long months of tension and doubt. I felt a sense of quiet pride in the way we had confronted manipulation with courage, exposed deception with dignity, and reclaimed control over our lives. But the victory was tempered by the subtle awareness that every revelation leaves a shadow, the knowledge that truth, while freeing, is never without a price. Margaret's presence at home remained a complex challenge. We maintained civility, yet every interaction carried echoes of the past, reminders of manipulation, and the silent weight of consequences. Her attempts at regaining authority were met with calm resistance, strategic boundaries, and unwavering honesty, tools she had never anticipated, but that now defined our interactions. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, but the emotional cost lingered, a constant reminder of what it means to unearth deeply buried truths. I often thought back to the moments before the exposure, the tension, the confrontation, the adrenaline of revealing what had been hidden for so long. It had been exhilarating, almost intoxicating, yet the aftermath demanded a different kind of strength, patience, reflection, and the courage to face lingering wounds without allowing bitterness to fester. Truth, I realized, is not only about revelation, it is about living with the consequences, no matter how painful or challenging they may be. As the weeks turned into months, our family began to heal in small, meaningful ways. Dinner conversations flowed more freely, laughter returned to quiet corners, and Daniel's eyes sparkled with renewed hope. Margaret, though never fully the same, adapted to the new reality with quiet acceptance, a subtle acknowledgement that her control had ended and that life would continue beyond her manipulations. Even the simplest interactions, shared meals, family walks, conversations, carried the weight of honesty, transparency, and mutual respect that had once been absent. Yet the cost of truth remained tangible. Old wounds occasionally surfaced, conversations sometimes reignited tensions, and the shadow of past deceptions lingered, a reminder that exposure, while liberating, demands vigilance and emotional resilience. I understood that the family's healing would be ongoing, requiring constant attention, empathy, and the courage to confront difficult truths when they arose. There was, however, a profound sense of liberation that outweighed the pain. The exposure had dismantled the chains of manipulation, restored agency to our lives, and allowed love, trust, and honesty to begin the slow process of repair. Daniel and I could now make decisions free from hidden influence, and even Margaret had to navigate her role within a family that no longer bowed to fear or deception. It was a fragile peace, yet one that promised growth, clarity, and the possibility of genuine connection. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and the rain softly pattered against the windows, I reflected on what had been lost, what had been gained, and what it meant to live in the light of truth. Secrets, lies, and manipulation had a price, and we had paid it together, as a family, learning the painful, humbling lesson that freedom and honesty are never without cost. I held Daniel's hand, feeling the reassurance of partnership, the bond strengthened by trials and revelation. "This is our life now," I whispered, "full of honesty, full of choices, and full of the truth, even when it hurts." He nodded, a quiet smile gracing his lips, a sense of relief and cautious hope emanating from him. The house, once a stage for secrets and manipulation, now echoed with quiet resilience. Margaret's presence, though complicated, no longer dictated our lives. The shadows of deception had been lifted, replaced by clarity, boundaries, and the profound recognition of what honesty truly demands. The price of truth had been steep, relationships tested, innocence lost, emotions raw, yet it had also brought freedom, empowerment, and the first genuine breath of a family unburdened by secrets. As the evening settled, and the house sank into the soft hush of nighttime, I realized that the true cost of truth is not just the exposure of lies, but the courage to live with the consequences, to navigate fractured relationships, and to embrace life fully, even after deception has cast its long shadow. The storm had passed, the silence had come, and the family, though changed forever, was ready to face the future honest. vigilant and unafraid. Truth had its price, but in paying it, we had reclaimed what mattered most: our lives, our agency, and the unshakable foundation of honesty upon which the next chapter would be built. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I understood finally that the greatest gift of truth is not only revelation, but the power to rebuild, to heal, and to live unshackled from the shadows of deception.